On the 7th of October 2023, Hamas perpetrated the worst massacre in Israel's history. Every day since then, the horror has continued. The hostages are still being held today. The Palestinian people have endured terrible suffering. Now, in Gaza, because of a catastrophic failure of aid, we see starving babies, children too weak to stand, images that will stay with us for a lifetime. The suffering must end. Yesterday I discussed this with President Trump, and we're mounting a major effort to get humanitarian supplies back in by air, and UK aid has been airdropped into Gaza today, and crucially, by land. We need to see at least 500 trucks entering Gaza every day. But ultimately, the only way to bring this humanitarian crisis to an end is through a long-term settlement. So we are supporting the US, Egyptian and Qatari efforts to secure a vital ceasefire. That ceasefire must be sustainable, and it must lead to a wider peace plan, which we're developing with our international partners. This plan will deliver security and proper governance in Gaza and pave the way for negotiations on a two-state solution. Our goal remains a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. But right now, that goal is under pressure like never before. I've always said that we will recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact for the two-state solution. With that solution now under threat, this is the moment to act. So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution. And this includes allowing the UN to restart the supply of aid and making clear that there will be no annexations in the West Bank. Meanwhile, our message to the terrorists of Hamas is unchanged and unequivocal. They must immediately release all of the hostages, sign up to a ceasefire, disarm, and accept that they will play no part in the government of Gaza. And we'll make an assessment in September on how far the parties have met these steps, but no one should have a veto over our decision. So this is the way forward. We will keep working with all our international partners to end the suffering, get aid flooding into Gaza, and deliver a more stable future for the Middle East. Because I know that is what the British people desperately want to see. Thank you. I'll take some questions. John.
Prime Minister, two issues here, obviously the aid and also the recognition of Palestine. First of all, on aid, what assurances did you receive from President Trump that he will use his influence with Prime Minister Netanyahu to allow the aid that you've talked about, the aid going in by trucks as well as by air? What assurance did you receive from him? He sounded as though when he talked about every ounce of food going in and you can't fake the pictures that we've seen on TV. Tell me about the reassurances you've heard, the promises, pledges from President Trump. And on the recognition issue, you do appear to have moved your position from as recently as last week, really, where you were talking about various other measures. I'm wondering what What has influenced you into making what looks like a U-turn here on this issue? Is it pressure from the 250 or so MPs, most of whom are Labour? Is it pressure from inside your cabinet? We hear there are 7 cabinet ministers pressing you to push for recognising Palestine. Or is it President Macron, who, of course, lobbied you? He talked about it last Thursday about recognising the Palestine also at the UN General Assembly. And what difference do you think actually recognising Palestine will actually make in practical terms?
Thank you for those questions. Firstly, on the question of aid, I won't go into the discussions I had with President Trump yesterday. We had a long session in private. And we discussed the situation in Gaza, and you heard the way the President then put it in the press conference that we held afterwards. And I think you could see for yourself his concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, as is my concern, because we've been saying for some considerable time now we need to get more aid in at volume and at speed, and the situation now is absolutely catastrophic, which is why I've taken this decision today. In relation to the two-state solution and the recognition of Palestine, this has been long-standing Labour Party policy. It was in our manifesto. We talked about the right of the Palestinians to recognition, and we've always said that would be part of the process, and that it would be an important part of the point that we thought it would have maximum impact. It's driven today by 2 things. Firstly, the context in the intolerable situation in Gaza, which is getting worse by the day, but also because of the concern that the very possibility of a two-state solution is reducing, and therefore it is very important to be seen in that context as a very important contribution to what I hope will be an alleviation of the situation on the ground, because I'm acutely aware that what needs to happen urgently is that aid into Gaza at speed and at volume, and that ceasefire that can open the way for a political process. So this is a decision taken by this government in the context of today, and after a meeting with my cabinet just earlier this afternoon. On the question of the difference it will make, the reason we have announced this in the way we have in relation to the General Assembly in September is precisely because I want to ensure that this plays a part in changing the conditions on the ground, and making sure that that aid gets in, making sure that there is hope of a two-state solution for the future. And therefore, I've always been interested in what is going to make a material difference, how can we work with our allies most effectively, and that's why this comes as a part of a peace plan that we've been working on for some considerable time, an 8-part plan, which I've already spoken to Germany and France about, and many other countries. So this should be in the context of answering the question, yes, how do you get humanitarian aid in at speed and at volume, but also what happens the day after a much-needed ceasefire so that we can get to a long-term peaceful outcome. And I think that that is the context in which you should see the decision that I've made today. Can I go to David, PA, please? David.
Yeah, thanks very much, Prime Minister. David Lynch from PA. In your statement just now, you've said that the UK will recognise the state of Palestine unless Israel takes steps to end the situation in Gaza and reach a ceasefire. That sounds like our recognition of Palestine is conditional. Why is that? And how confident are you that a ceasefire can be reached by September? Well,
the primary aim here is to change the situation on the ground for people who desperately need change. We need a ceasefire. We need always to keep in our mind the hostages and the atrocity of October the 7th. And they must be immediately released. They've been held a very, very long time. But also we need, alongside that, to ensure that we get aid in at volume and in speed into Gaza, because the situation is simply intolerable. And this is intended to further that cause. And it is done now because I am particularly concerned that the very idea of a two-state solution is reducing and feels further away today than it has for many, many years, and therefore it should be seen in both of those contexts. Thank you both very much indeed.
Well, there we are. It's 5 o'clock. You're watching the News Hour with me, Mark Austin, and we've just heard a very significant statement from the Prime Minister in two parts, really, talking first about the humanitarian situation inside Gaza. He said it is intolerable. He used that word many times, and he said the suffering must end. And to that effect, he says he has talked to President Trump in the talks they had in Scotland about what he described as a major effort to get aid into Gaza. And then to the second point, which is this recognition of the state of Palestine, he said there are some phases here, supporting the US, Egyptian and Qatar efforts, he said, for a ceasefire. That must then lead to a wider peace plan, which is under discussion, but which would lead to a two-state solution, a secure Israel alongside a Palestinian state. But, and then he made the point that is becoming obvious to everyone, that idea of a two-state solution is under threat, as he put it, like never before. So he said this is the moment to act, and the UK will recognise the state of Palestine unless, he said, Israel takes some steps to, well, substantive steps, he called them, to end the appalling situation in Gaza, reaches a ceasefire and makes clear there will be no annexation in the West Bank, and commits to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. Well, in a moment, I'll speak to our correspondent in the region, Sally Lockwood, who is in Jerusalem. But first, let's focus on what Keir Starmer had to say. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in Downing Street and has just been asking a question of the Prime Minister. So, John, a significant move, the recognition of a Palestinian state, but it is conditional, although the conditions he set are unlikely to be met, to be fair, by the Israelis.
Yes, Mark, you just spelled out those conditions which he talked about, and it's in the official readout of the Cabinet that met this afternoon. And yes, just to summarise them briefly, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, reaches a ceasefire, makes clear there's no annexation of the West Bank, commits to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. So yes, the statement and the answers to questions were in two parts. One on the aid. I asked him, first of all, what assurances he'd had from President Trump about putting pressure on, using his influence with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He wouldn't go into that. He said they were private discussions. But I can tell you, Mark, that this morning, ahead of the Cabinet meeting and ahead of the statement we just heard, Sir Keir Starmer spoke on the phone to Benjamin Netanyahu, no doubt giving him advance warning what he was going to say this afternoon and what the British Cabinet was going to agree. He also spoke before the meeting to Cabinet to the King of Jordan, obviously seen as a key player in the region. Tonight, he will have more phone calls with other world leaders, particularly other European leaders, to sell this proposal to other European leaders. Now, we know he spoke to President Macron and Chancellor Merz of Germany at the weekend. Obviously, he's got them on side, he hopes. He will no doubt say it's very much a package of measures agreed and discussed with those two leaders, but there are more talks to come. Now, and when it comes to the question, what difference will recognising the state of Palestine make? He said that the aim was really to improve the situation on the ground. But clearly, given that there are these conditions, that's obviously quite a big ask. And so it's not by no means certain. It's interesting that he said that if the UK does recognise Palestine, it will come before the United Nations General Assembly in September. President Macron said last Thursday at the UN General Assembly. Now, we know that the Foreign Secretary David Lammy is, as we speak, at another UN conference in New York. we will get a further reaction from him, no doubt, very shortly. But it is a very major statement, this. It is a change in the position, really. I mean, last week, the government was basically rebuffing demands from the likes of Sarah Champion, the MP who chairs the International Development Select Committee. There was no warm response to the letter from 250 MPs. Clearly, they've had a discussion at Cabinet, and he mentioned the Cabinet there in his statement. It's reported that at least 7 Cabinet ministers have been pressing the Prime Minister to recognise Palestine. Now, given all these conditions, will all those MPs and those cabinet ministers agree that this is enough? They may say it's not good enough. They may say, A, these conditions are unreasonable, or they may say waiting until towards the end of August is taking too long. So we await the reaction to the Prime Minister's statement, but it certainly is a very significant statement. It's a big development. Obviously, he says the top priority is to get the aid in. That will obviously depend on whether Prime Minister Netanyahu is prepared to let those trucks in. The PM talked at the beginning of his statement about the airdrops. Well, David Lammy said at the weekend airdrops are not ideal. What is needed is to get some trucks in, because the statistics show that you can get far more aid in on trucks than you can with airdrops. That was demonstrated in our report from one of the relief planes, the humanitarian aid planes, by our colleague Sally Lockwood yesterday. So big developments. Obviously, we await the reaction from the Middle East and from other European partners, but the Prime Minister has really moved today, and he will be hoping that this helps make some progress, first of all in getting the aid in that's needed, and secondly, perhaps breaking the deadlock in moves to get some sort of peace process going.
And just one point, John, is there any detail on this idea of getting what he called or making a major effort to get aid into Gaza? Because obviously there are problems with that. We've seen the problems with that. How did he give any idea at all about how that would work, what that major effort would involve, and whether it would involve the Americans? Anything on that?
No more detail, no, other than what's in the statement. But what we do know is the British government, both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, have talked over the weekend about working with the Jordanians. That's presumably why he spoke to the King of Jordan today, to step up the joint relief effort with the Jordanians. Sounds as though that's the plan, getting the Jordanians obviously to help with, if not with more airdrops, but which probably will happen anyway. But clearly, it really is up to the Israeli government to get the lorries in, and that's where we'll hope that President Trump can use his influence to persuade Prime Minister Netanyahu to let more lorries in. Clearly, the situation, the PM was saying, has deteriorated in the last few days. And clearly it had an impact on President Trump, talking about getting every ounce of food in. And you're saying that those television pictures, you can't fake that. So things have really moved in the last few days with all these talks, with, first of all, the PM speaking to the leaders of France and Germany at weekend. And clearly, all the talking with President Trump over the last day or so, the last 24 hours, it appears to have had an impact and may break the deadlock in getting more aid in on the land, in lorries, rather than having to rely quite so much on the airdrops, which are haphazard, potentially dangerous, critics say, and don't get as much aid in as if you let the lorries in.
John, we're going to leave it there because we're going to go straight to the United Nations, where David Lammy is speaking.
Our history means that Britain bears a special burden of responsibility to support the two-state solution. In the last 12 months, the United Kingdom government has repeatedly taken action in the face of the current crisis. We restored funding to UNRWA. We suspended arms exports that could be used in Gaza. We provided tens of millions of pounds in humanitarian assistance. We signed a landmark agreement with the Palestinian Authority, and we stood up for the independence of the international courts. We have delivered 3 sanctions packages on violent settlers, and we suspended trade negotiations with the Israeli government, and we sanctioned far-right Israeli ministers for incitement. Yet, dear friends, the situation on the ground continues to worsen, and the two-state solution is in peril. And so to reach that better future, we must first reflect on the past. 108 years ago, my predecessor as British Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, signed the declaration that bears his name. It helped lay the foundations for a homeland for the Jewish people. And Britain can be proud of that. Our support for Israel, its right to exist, and the security of its people is steadfast. However, the Balfour Declaration came with the solemn promise that nothing shall be done, nothing which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the Palestinian people as well. And colleagues, this has not been upheld, and it is a historical injustice which continues to unfold. As diplomats and politicians, we have become accustomed to uttering the words, a two-state solution. Countless times, this Assembly and the Security Council has proclaimed that there must be a two-state resolution. Resolution after resolution. Resolution 181, Resolution 242, Resolution 446, Resolution 1515, Resolution 2334. These cannot be just numbers on a page, but the conviction of a deeply frustrated world. Chairs, Hamas must never be rewarded for the monstrous attack on October the 7th. It must immediately release the hostages, agree to an immediate ceasefire, accept it will have no role in governing Gaza, and commit to disarmament. But Hamas are not the Palestinian people, and there is no contradiction between support for Israel's security and support for Palestinian statehood. Indeed, the opposite is true. Let me be clear. The Netanyahu government's rejection of a two-state solution is wrong. It's wrong morally and it's wrong strategically. It harms the interests of the Israeli people, closing off the only path to a just and lasting peace. And that is why we are determined to protect the viability of a two-state solution. And so it is with the hand of history on our shoulders that His Majesty's government therefore intends to recognize the state of Palestine when the UN General Assembly gathers in September here in New York. Friends, we will do this unless the Israeli government acts to end the appalling situation in Gaza, ends its military campaign, and commits to a long, sustainable peace based on a two-state solution. Our demands on Hamas also remain absolute and unwavering. Before the UN General Assembly gathers, we will take stock of how far the parties have come in meeting these steps. No one side will have a veto on recognition through their actions or inactions. But recognition by itself will not change the situation on the ground. That is why we are taking immediate steps as well like airdropping humanitarian supplies along with our partners in Jordan, getting injured children into British hospitals, and pressing for the resumption of the United Nations humanitarian assistance. We also believe that a lasting ceasefire requires urgent progress on governance and security in Gaza. We are therefore working with allies on a plan for long-term political negotiations and a two-state solution. Chair, there is no better vision for the future of the region than two states. Israelis living within secure borders, recognized and at peace with their neighbors, free from the threat of terrorism, and Palestinians living in their own state in dignity and security, free of occupation. The decades-long conflict between Israelis and Palestinians cannot be managed or contained. It must now be resolved. Britain is ready to play its full and historic part. Thank you very much.
So there we are, hard on the heels of Sir Keir Starmer. That was the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, speaking at the United Nations and saying that history suggests Britain has a special responsibility to work towards a two-state solution. He then spoke about Hamas. He said Hamas must release the hostages, agree to a ceasefire and accept no further role in Gaza. And then he talked about the Israeli government, the Netanyahu government, and said the Netanyahu government's rejection of a two-state solution is wrong morally and strategically. And then he used the phrase that Tony Blair used regarding Northern Ireland, talked about the hand of history on our shoulders, and he said we will recognise the state of Palestine unless the Israelis meet certain conditions. And there's a key man, obviously, in all this. Donald Trump, President Trump is on his way back to the United States. And if, as Keir Starmer says, he's agreed to work towards a major effort for humanitarian aid to get into Gaza, then he is going to have to get on with it in terms of talking to Benjamin Netanyahu and working out exactly how that aid is going to get in, how much aid is going to get in, because, and he's just getting on, by the way, he's just flown from helicopter, by helicopter from Aberdeen, his golf course there, where he's been for a couple of days. He was in Turnberry in Ayrshire before that, and he's just flown to RAF Lossiemouth, I thought it was Prestwick Airport, it says there. I thought it was RAF Lossiemouth. But anyway, I think it is Lossiemouth. It is from there that he will now fly across the Atlantic, back across the Atlantic to Andrews Air Force Base, and then the short hop back to the White House after this 4 or 5 day visit to Scotland to open a new golf course. We can join Sally Lockwood, who is in Jerusalem. And Sally, let's just talk about this in two parts. First of all, this decision to recognise the state of Palestine in September, unless Israel meets these certain conditions. I just wonder how that will go down in Israel, first of all.
Yeah, hello, Mark. Well, it's likely to elicit a very strong and negative reaction from the Israelis and from Benjamin Netanyahu. Of course, we've already seen how the Israeli Prime Minister and his government have reacted to similar moves by other European countries, namely France, and they are not happy about it. Frankly, they are furious. It's very interesting that Keir Starmer has made this move, an announcement, following Donald Trump's visit and his meetings with him in Scotland, and certainly we'll wait to hear the reaction from the Israelis. But in the past, when other countries have made these moves, like France, they've said that it rewards terrorism and that it threatens to create another Iranian proxy, a state that would want to annihilate Israel. It's fair to say that this will have a very negative reaction here from the Israeli government. And it comes just after the Knesset voted in favour just last week of annexing the West Bank. Again, another symbolic move, but something that would thwart the popular plan for a path to peace in this region for many of Israel's allies, which is a two-state solution. Annexing the West Bank simply would make that unviable. So it seems that Israel and its traditional allies, like France and the UK, are moving in opposite directions in terms of their plans for how to create peace between the Palestinians and Israel.
Yeah, and I mean, this point to make about these conditions that Keir Starmer has put down. He talks about getting aid into Gaza. That's one thing. Reaching a ceasefire, that's another thing. But then this idea of committing to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. And Benjamin Netanyahu has said on many occasions he is vehemently set against that.
Yes, that's right, Mark. It's very hard at the moment to see how these two sides will reach any sort of agreement when it comes to the future of Palestinians in this region. And when it comes to aid, it was interesting that Keir Starmer said British aid has now been airdropped into Gaza today, and that aid needs to flood Gaza, I think, were his words. Well, this comes, of course, after another report today from the UN, from the leading international organisation when it comes to food crises, that they are seeing essentially famine, the worst case scenario for famine playing out in Gaza, despite it not being formally declared yet, because they don't have the official data and research that is required to declare a famine officially. And that's mainly due to the lack of access to Gaza. And they're warning that we could now potentially see mass deaths if there isn't immediate action. Now, of course, we have seen these airdrops in the last 3 days. We've had that announcement from Israel that there are to be humanitarian pauses in 3 areas of Gaza to allow aid to get in by road. But what is actually happening? It's very hard to get detail of how that is playing out on the ground. I spoke to a staff member at UNICEF to find out what aid they're managing to get in, and he said still very little, that actually they've managed to get lorries into Karim Shalom, the border area between Gaza and Israel, but it's a 3-step process. Firstly, the lorries have to be allowed in there, and then agencies like UNICEF need to be given permission to go and collect the aid, and then they need to distribute it to their partners. It is a very lengthy process. It requires a lot of coordination and clearances. And right now, that aid is simply not moving fast enough. And the other challenge they have, gangs and crowds of people, desperate people, looting that aid on the roads. And there are supposed to be secure routes now as well for that aid to reach people. I asked how bad things were. Are they managing to get food to children who've got malnutrition, to pregnant women who've got malnutrition? Of course, we've heard the statistics of just how many children now are suffering in Gaza. And he said he simply doesn't know, but that aid is definitely not flowing fast enough. They've got some preventative food out from Karim Shalom today. Now, that's essentially high-energy biscuits, it's vaccines, it's nappies and it's baby formula. That they've managed to get on the road, but not enough of it. And in terms of therapeutic foods, he said that's still at Karim Shalom in that border area. Now, therapeutics food, I've learnt today, is essentially almost like a peanut butter type paste, which is high in energy and high in micronutrients and won't prevent a child from suffering with malnutrition, but it will get them out of the danger zone. Now, UNICEF hasn't had any confirmation that that has actually hit the roads in Gaza. Now, I found all this detail really interesting because it's so hard to understand exactly what picture is going on in terms of aid distribution, but we've had these headlines that there have been humanitarian pauses, that safe routes will be created, that there are going to be airdrops. But the reality is 1 in 3 people in Gaza, we've learned from the UN, haven't eaten for several days, that 25% of children and pregnant women are now suffering from malnutrition. And according to UNICEF, this staff member that's spoken to me this afternoon, they still haven't been able to get aid to those people, and time is running out. This is no longer about sounding the alarm. People don't have until tomorrow to wait for food. That aid that is waiting at the border in Gaza simply needs to be accelerated into the places that need it, and fast. There is no time to waste, and filming shots of lorries going into that border area doesn't mean it's good news. It's still not getting to the people who so desperately need it.
And Sally, of course, you were on one of these aid drops of aid into Gaza by the Jordanians and the UAE, but these are very small amounts, aren't they? And it can be dangerous, clearly. But those aid drops, I gather, have been continuing today. I think we've got pictures of those aid drops continuing today, and we understand that that's going to go on for the foreseeable future. But I suppose my question to you is there any sign at all that Israel accepts that there is a humanitarian crisis, that there is starvation in Gaza? Because I heard the foreign minister today talking about lies, and a Israeli government spokesman came on this programme last week and said the only famine was a famine of the truth. So is there any sign at all that the Israeli government is accepting there is a humanitarian crisis that needs sorting out now in Gaza?
Well, I think it's very interesting that they announced these new humanitarian measures just a few days ago. Certainly, they are feeling international pressure. Whether they believe it or not is another thing. It's certainly not something that they've made public. They like to make the same lines time and time again, that Hamas is to blame. There are stockpiles of food and aid in Gaza. It's the UN's fault for not distributing it. But it's very interesting, Mark, to hear how Israelis actually feel. We were crossing the border from Jordan back into Israel today after that airdrop flight, and an Israeli border employee made it clear to us that they weren't happy at all about the situation in Gaza. They don't feel represented by their government. So I think what you will hear from Benjamin Netanyahu and the likes of Israel Katz is very different from what you may hear from Israeli civilians. And just on those aid drops, again, one of the announcements made by the Israeli government in order to alleviate the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, well, I mean, they're hugely symbolic and they really make very little difference. And if anything, we've heard from Palestinians on the ground in Gaza that it's just making the situation even more dangerous, that crowds of people are rushing towards those aid drops when they land, and they can only carry very little, a fraction of what you can fit in a convoy of lorries. And people are rushing towards them. It's now very much being controlled by gangs who are fighting people. They've got knives, they've got guns to try and get to the food, and it's hitting the black market. It's just not getting to the weakest people, those people who really need it. And I just had a message from someone in Khan Yunis who said to me, you know, I've been out for 2 days looking for food. He's got 3 very young children, including a baby who's got malnutrition. And he said to me, I spent 2 days trying to get food, and I've come back with 2 kilos of chickpeas. Now, I've no idea whether they were tinned chickpeas or raw chickpeas, but another criticism that this UN report made today about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that controversial body that began distributing the aid in Gaza in May, backed by Israel and the US, the report has essentially said that their plans for aid distribution in Gaza would lead to mass starvation, because what they're distributing simply isn't fit for purpose. You need water and you need fuel to cook a lot of what they're giving out, and people in Gaza simply don't have that.
OK, Sally, thank you very much indeed. And these are latest pictures of the that aid drop that Sally Lockwood was talking about. And these are pictures over Gaza. We're waiting for David Lammy to speak again to reporters, this time at the United Nations. While we wait, let's hear what the Prime Minister had to say a short time ago.
On the 7th of October 2023, Hamas perpetrated the worst massacre in Israel's history. Every day since then, the horror has continued. The hostages are still being held today. The Palestinian people have endured terrible suffering. Now, in Gaza, because of a catastrophic failure of aid, we see starving babies, children too weak to stand, images that will stay with us for a lifetime. The suffering must end. Yesterday, I discussed this with President Trump, and we're mounting a major effort to get humanitarian supplies back in.
Interrupting the Prime Minister, because David Lammy is now speaking live at the UN to
recognise the state of Palestine in September before UNGA. We have always believed that there is no better vision for the future of the region than two states. I'll let my words earlier speak for themselves, but I'm very happy to take a few questions. Let me start with the BBC.
Tom Bateman from the BBC, Foreign Secretary, thank you. There is a diminishing amount of Palestine left to recognise. Your critics will say this is because successive UK governments have empowered and facilitated Israeli governments that have made that very state unviable territorially and through the use of arms. How do you address the UK's responsibility when it comes to this? And why has it taken starvation to make you act now? And also, if I may, how much pressure is the UK government putting on the Israeli leadership to allow journalists independent access to Gaza?
Well, look, let me be clear. Since coming to office, we restored funding to UNRWA. It was important that we took the sober decision to suspend arms sales to Israel that could be used in Gaza. And of course, working with our partners, we've done everything possible to get the humanitarian aid into Gaza, to get those trucks in, and to ensure that we fund UK Med. And we've treated 24,000 Palestinians in that period. But the decision that we have taken today puts us on a pathway towards recognition. And over the next 8 weeks, what we are attempting to do is affect the situation on the ground. We have seen the most horrific scenes. The global community is deeply offended by children being shot and killed as they reach out for aid. The time has come for a ceasefire. The time has come to see those hostages released, and the time has come to abate the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza, to get them the aid and the medical equipment and supplies that they need. And it is my sincere hope that the decision that we have taken today affects the situation on the ground, and we get to that ceasefire, we get to those hostages coming out as soon as possible. And let me say, it has always been the position of the United Kingdom government that we support aid workers, and we abhor the loss of life of aid workers. And of course, it's essential that journalists are able to go about their business in Gaza and report the facts as they see it without fear or favour. Al Jazeera.
Al-Arabiya.
Oh. I think I had a question for Al Jazeera. I was told Al Jazeera. Is Al Jazeera here?
Al-Arabiya.
Right there.
Thank you. Foreign Secretary, two questions. Number one is, did your Prime Minister give a heads up to the U.S. President yesterday? Okay? And second question, your recognition of Palestine is conditioned, as you said. It's a pathway to recognition. Why is there this conditionality? And how will your government decide if Israel has met the conditions or not?
Well, let me state it wouldn't be right for me to comment on private conversations between our Prime Minister and the President of the United States, except to say, as you know, that the United Kingdom has the most special of relationships with the United States. We have always been clear that no country has a veto on solemn decisions that we make in the United Kingdom, and you will have seen in my statement that I made reference to the unique position of the UK in relation to the situation we see in Israel and Gaza and the occupied territories and the Balfour Declaration. And we have made a decision that puts us on a pathway to recognition next month. But what we have attempted to do is to affect the situation on the ground. And I sincerely hope that we see a dramatic improvement in the suffering, that we see a commitment to a ceasefire, and we see a commitment to a diplomatic process such that we do not get a pause in relation to that ceasefire, but we get an enduring peace. And it's for us to assess those conditions as we get to next month. But the undertaking I made in the General Assembly just a few minutes ago is a solemn undertaking in front of the whole global community. PA, I think. The PA. AP, sorry, AP.
Thank you. To follow up on Tom's question, what the French government has said it's willing to take actions calling on the EU to implement unfreeze money that Israel owes to the Palestinian Authority, to be able to sanction any Israeli settlers that are targeting West Bank settlements. What is the UK planning on doing to be able to coerce or incentivize Israel to fall in line? Will there be an arms embargo? Will there be any sanctions against Israel if they do not comply in this?
Well, the United Kingdom has already taken steps to sanction violent settlers on the ground, and these are decisions that other countries have not taken. We also took decisions to sanction Ben Gvir and Smodrik, and these are decisions that the European Union have not yet taken. We indicated 27 foreign ministers came together with me in a statement just 2 weeks ago, and we indicated that we would take further steps to affect the situation on the ground, and we are clear about that. But today is about achieving the abatement of the suffering that we see on the ground. We have to have those trucks get in, and our assessment is that 25 trucks went in, I think, on Sunday, perhaps up to 35 just in this last period. We have delivered 20 tons of aid with our Jordanian friends into northern Gaza in terms of airdrops to alleviate the suffering, and obviously to ensure that those airdrops landed safely in a clear path. But that will not ease the suffering that we are seeing, the malnourishment that now is widespread, and the fear of starvation that is a global concern. And so the United Kingdom, working with partners, and you've seen us working with our Arab partners, but obviously working alongside France and Saudi Arabia today, we are all attempting to bring an end to this suffering. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
So that's David Lammy, just pretty much repeating what he said in the UN chamber there, talking about ending the suffering and the fear of starvation, and also moving to this pathway to the recognition of a Palestinian state. Let's move now to Tess Ingram of UNICEF, and who has been on the front line in many ways. Let's talk. I know you're in New York at the moment, but I know you probably don't want to talk politics. Just I wondered whether you had a reaction, first of all, to the decision to recognise a Palestinian state.
We welcome the UK government's decision to push for a lasting ceasefire, to lift the blockade of aid. And yes, ultimately, what the children of Palestine and Israel need is a lasting peace. That is what we need to see.
And now, just on the ground, let's talk about what's going on. We've got this UN-backed monitoring group today talking about the worst-case scenario of famine is currently playing out in the Gaza Strip. Saying it's not yet a famine, but a famine in the making. What does that look like in reality?
In reality, it means that we've already failed thousands of families, thousands of children. We've failed them because people are hungry. This body today, which are a group of global experts, found that 1 in 3 people are now going days at a time without eating, days. We're seeing the number of children coming to UNICEF malnutrition clinics for treatment rising rapidly, 5,000 in just the first 2 weeks of this month. And of course, we're seeing deaths related to starvation. This is incredibly concerning. It's a grave warning from the IPC. So even though it's not a declaration of famine, we can't wait for that. We have to act now to prevent us from getting to that point, because once we're there, we know that already so many people will be dying from the conditions on the ground, which, to remind everybody, are preventable.
Right, and this report is talking about 2 out of 3 famine thresholds, it says, have been reached. What is the third threshold that would need to be reached for it to be declared a famine?
So the first threshold is food insecurity, how much people have to eat. The second is the number of children with malnutrition. And the third is the proportion of starvation-related deaths within the population. And this body, the IPC, has made it clear that they don't yet have the robust data needed to make that assessment. And so we understand there'll be another analysis coming, hopefully soon, to give us more clarity on that third threshold.
Right, there's been a lot of talk in the last few days, couple of days certainly, about the trucks and the food on the borders of Gaza. Is that getting in on anything like enough scale?
Nothing like enough scale. Nowhere close to what's needed. We need more than 600 trucks a day to meet people's needs, and we're still at very, very low volumes. It has increased marginally since the announcement to put some other measures in place was made by the Israeli authorities on Sunday, but it is still nowhere near enough. And we still face tremendous challenges, not just in aid entering the Gaza Strip, but then in us collecting that aid and being able to take it safely to the people that need it. And there are a number of constraints that we face in doing that, including getting authorization to go and collect the aid. That does not come often enough. And then, of course, when we leave, we face unsafe conditions from both the bombardments, but also the insecurity on the ground, as your correspondent was saying earlier.
Right, and these are difficulties being caused by getting permissions to do various things and, permissions for movements and so forth, and security. Is that it? Because the reason I ask is because Israel's foreign minister said today that it was a lie to say that Israel was deliberately withholding food.
What we see on the ground is that there is a very complex process that we have to go through to go to the crossings and collect the aid. It's not like a drive-through where we can turn up at any point in time, collect the aid and leave. We have to get permission to go there. We have to declare the car that we will be travelling in, who will be in that car, what time we will travel. We will then get what we call a green light to make that mission. Often our requests are denied, or if they are approved, they're delayed for hours. Our colleagues at OCHA, who coordinate all of the humanitarian affairs, recently said that it takes 20 hours on average to do one of these collections. 20 hours. And the Gaza Strip is not a big place. So we face tremendous challenge in going and picking up the aid, and then again, challenges on the way out. And ultimately, that's frustrating for us, but it's the children who suffer as a result, because this aid is not getting to them fast enough.
Just finally, Tess, President Trump has been in Scotland, and our correspondent asked him just before he left to go back to Washington, what has he said to Netanyahu about all this? And Donald Trump said, I've been talking to Netanyahu, we're going to straighten things out. What would be needed to straighten things out in Gaza?
It's clear, and it's the same thing that we've been asking for this entire conflict now, that is open every available crossing.
not just the one in the south or occasionally the one in the north. We need every available crossing open to trucks so that we can bring in aid at scale. We need to bring in all types of aid, not just food aid. We need water, we need medicine. We also need to make sure that that aid can move from the crossings. Getting it to a crossing is not good enough. It needs to then safely get to the end point. And lastly, we need commercial goods to come in as well. Aid alone cannot support more than 2 million people. We need to be able to offer them vegetables and meat and eggs and other things that don't necessarily come in an aid parcel. This would be a start. This would be a really good step in making sure that we're beginning to address almost 2 years of deprivation and suffering. But of course, above all else, we need the bombardments to stop and we need a ceasefire.
Tess Ingram, appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, just to recap the news this hour, it is that Keir Starmer has announced that the UK will recognise the state of Palestine in September. They'll do that before the United Nations General Assembly, unless the Israeli government commits to various commitments, such as taking steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, said the Prime Minister, reaches a ceasefire, makes clear there will be no annexation in the West Bank, and commits to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. Keir Starmer also saying that he'd spoken to President Trump about the humanitarian situation and they'd agreed that they must make a major effort to get aid into Gaza.